Because when I met Roger Stone here last year, had he said to me what is written on the screen maybe a year before that, I probably would have been right in the same boat with him, cheering him on. But he said that he was a hardcore Zionist, and so was President Trump. And of course, we were the only news agency covering the Trump rally at the time. We were invited there, and a lot of you guys, I think, already are aware of this. But what was happening at that time, we were already beginning to see some things that were going on that were troubling us. And a lot of things have changed since then that has really opened up our eyes. And Satan has just definitely, he snuck one over on many of us, and none of us really, I think, expected it. We've focused a lot on the Vatican, and the Vatican definitely is playing their role in this. There's no question about it. But when we speak about this, it is important, as Jana was saying, that we don't single out the people themselves. Because there are many good Jewish people that are still Orthodox Jews, that are still believers in, that are in the Catholic Church, Methodist, Baptist, whatever, that really do love God. There's many Jews that really from their heart love the Lord without any question whatsoever. And of course, as many of us have been over the years, even when we have been staunch supporters of Israel as far as the state of Israel, our biggest desire has always been for those of us that are believers, which I think speaks for everyone in the room, was for them to recognize Yeshua as the Messiah. That's been our greatest desire of all, and it's been my desire from day one. In 2004, though, I narrowly escaped a suicide bomber, and it was only because Yah had revealed to me by the Kodesh that I was fixing to walk into the path with the girl that was walking with me down the sidewalk there in Jerusalem, that I was headed to my death, and that she was going to ignite the explosives, and I was going to be standing there with her. And if that would have happened, if it hadn't have been for his intervention, I would have died that day. But by his grace, as I'm going down the sidewalk, he speaks to me and tells me, you're going the wrong way. You need to go back the other way, the way I directed you to start with. And that's not the exact words now, but just to paraphrase what he was saying to my heart. And the thing was it wasn't like I've had visitations, I've heard audible things. I don't speak about that publicly because I don't think we should major on those things. But the thing is, this day it wasn't like that. I thought it was just me thinking these things. Because the first thought that had happened is I was going to pray. There was a little forest nearby where I lived at, and I actually lived across the street from Gershon Solomon, those of you that may know Gershon. And so I was going to pray that day, and there were a lot of other Orthodox Jews that prayed in this little forest where I was at. And I'd made the turn, and I was going down this really steep hill that I hated. And all of a sudden in my head, I hear my voice say, "You idiot! You know you hate going this way." Well, that's true, but the Holy Spirit's not going to call you an idiot, but I just thought it was me thinking that, right? And I didn't know why I went that way, because I like the easy way, like most Americans do, take the highway, walk around the edge, and go over the little side curb, and you can go down a few, not too far down, and you're not going down a super steep hill where your shins are about to break off, trying to stop you from going down the hill. And I was on the phone as I was talking, and as I was talking to someone on the phone, that thought comes to my head. I'm like, okay, fine, all right, I'll go the other way. So I turn around. I didn't go down the hill. I'm like, good. I go back around, and as I do, then I hear my voice speak again, thinking it's just myself thinking, and just as kind as it could be, I heard myself think this thought here. If you go this way, you've got another phone call to make, and when you get there to that corner right there, you're not going to leave it. You'll turn your back to the wind, because the wind is always blowing out of the west, so that they don't hear the wind blowing in the phone. And I'm sitting there walking, and the thought comes in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah. So I turn around and go back the other way. And right when I do, now the thing is both paths are parallel. The only difference is that steep hill drops me just enough, just in time, and when she blew the bomb up, I was not completely off my feet from just the concussion of the bomb. But the blast went over the top of my head. Whereas otherwise, I would have went out with the other two. There was actually 2 soldiers that were killed that day. They were both Ethiopian, And that was the most notorious bus stop there. It's near a place called French Hill, just outside of where the Hebrew University is there. And but by His grace, I'm here today to be able to tell you more about the amazing grace of Yeshua. And of course, as it was then, my heart's desire has always been that my people's eyes would come open to know that Yeshua is indeed the Mashiach. And I've always been gentle about the way I approach them. And there are hundreds of Jews that watch our program. Sometimes they'll write me, sometimes they don't, but they'll never leave comments. Never. But they'll write you privately and tell you. And I've had those that are living in Israel that have come out and believed in Yeshua as a result. And so I'm thankful for the things that we're able to do in helping them to recognize Yeshua. But we have to remember, I've spoke a lot about, as God began to reveal to us, something He laid on my heart one day, and this was what really made me think a lot, was that we always see how there's cyclical events in history. And we are living in another cyclical event. We are today, as we live today, we are seeing history repeat like it was 2,000 years ago. And not just a cyclical event, because if we look at what Yeshua did when He quotes from Isaiah 61, chapter 61, verse 1, and then He quotes half of verse 2, where He talks about the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me. He has anointed me to preach the good tidings unto the meek, the poor, etc. And I'm just paraphrasing this for the sake of time. And then He goes halfway into verse 2. He closes the scroll, hands it back to the priest there, and He says, "This day, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." He didn't even read the other half. The other half was dealing with judgment. The other half also deals with redemption of Israel as you go further down. But He didn't deal with that issue there, because He knew that He had a certain mission and it was going to be cut right there, and the other part would be fulfilled at His second coming. But His second coming is not going to be quite like some people think either. He's coming back for judgment. He'll send His two witnesses, and they're going to be the ones that are going to really bring the shocker, but we should be doing everything we can to try to win the Jewish people to Christ now, because believe me, as it was 2,000 years ago, it is 2,000 years later the same. When He left, everything is set up again the same way it was. We had a Sanhedrin council 2,000 years ago, we got one today. There was a high priest in Israel 2,000 years ago, we have one today. Rome was heavily involved in Israel 2,000 years ago. Rome is heavily involved in Israel today. Yana mentioned a little earlier that about halakha law. And I'll explain something to you about halakha. Halakha is actually a word in Hebrew that comes from, like, if you're making the bread, the matzah, halakha is when you take a little small portion out and you set it aside. That's halakha. And when Prime Minister Netanyahu decided that the Vatican should get Mount Zion, he went to the rabbi there that was over Mount Zion, and he said, this needs to be done under halakha law. No referendum in Israel. He used halakha law, in other words, setting aside a portion for Rome. All right? They're married, is what they are. They're married. And we're going to talk maybe a little bit about that as well. But the point is Rome is in control in Israel today, along with the Israelis, and they're also, Rome's tentacles go to all this world, and of course NATO is under the command of Rome. In fact, if you don't believe it, look at all the foreign ministers, the prime ministers and different leaders of Europe. A couple of years back, they go to the Pope of Rome and they said to the Pope of Rome, we can't survive, the EU can't survive without your leadership. So they made sure that they brought the Pope back in. All right, and as I said, you guys already know, most of you here, I'm sure, is there anybody here that's never heard you're maybe visiting with a friend that's never heard anything I've spoke about? Okay, all right, I'll just say this for those here just quickly. So many scriptures were fulfilled with the Vatican, and this is what I really used to pay close attention to. And even though I knew that this relationship between Israel and the Vatican had to happen in order to set the stage as it was 2,000 years ago, I had missed the crucial part that the modern state of Israel, the secular, not even the secular, that's not fair to say because there's secular Jews that are going to believe Yeshua to be the Messiah, but the elite of the government of Israel, what they are doing right now is going to fulfill what they did 2,000 years ago when they handed Yeshua over to be condemned by the Roman authorities. They had already tried him and they had handed him over. And Yeshua said that's going to happen to us as believers. As he said, they're going to drag you into the synagogues, right? He didn't say anything they're going to drag you into the churches. They're going to drag you into the synagogues. All right? So we're going to get condemned once again, but now we're going to play the part that he had to play. Okay? Now, so the issue was, though, as they've set this whole system up, like I said, as it was 2,000 years ago, everything is being set today. I forgot what I was going to say a minute ago, but maybe I'll get to it here in a second. Oh, yes. But for the sake of the few people here that have not heard this before, not only did they give Mount Zion over to the Vatican, that was fulfilling Obadiah's prophecy. And there were two prominent rabbis that I sent it to, and both of them immediately made it public, but they didn't say anything about how they knew about it. And they went to the Talmud to find somebody that would say, that agree with me so they could make sure they could say it as well. But as Rabbi Tovia Singer, he did videos about it where I showed how that the Pope of Rome, when he came and he drank in the upper room, was fulfilling the prophecy in Obadiah where it says, anybody got a Hebrew Bible?
I do.
Do you?
Yeah.
Can you open it up for me, sis?
Yeah.
And but what he does is he sits there and thank you.
No.
Toda rabba. Oh, it's laid out normal.
I bought it in Israel. In the Galilee.
Yes. Bear with me one second there. I just want to bring this out because I think it's important to do this while we're at this. Obadiah is where we're going, or Obadiah. So if you have a Bible, you want to turn there. It's on page 997. Just kidding. I'm waiting on Dr. Pigeon to put the Sefer where it's also... It doesn't have to be interlinear, but it would be nice to have it to where they're side by side. And it's an awesome work, by the way, that they're doing. Brother Brad, Sister Stephanie, and the rest of the crew there at the Sefer group there. This is an awesome work because what I really appreciate about what they're doing is that the courage to be willing to go back and to take what Rome and so many others have taken out, and they've included it. And that's commendable. What page did I say it was on?
997.
Oh, there it is. If you miss that one page, you'll miss everything. All right, I think it's verse 14 or maybe verse 16. Let me just see. That's verse 16 here.
16.
All right. Now, in the English, this version here says, because just as you drank on my holy mountain, all the nations will drink continually. They will drink and swallow and become as if they had never existed. All right, but in Hebrew, it's more interesting. It says, ki ka'asha shutetem. All right, now, shutetem, you can also, even though it's got a masculine suffix on there, that can be both feminine and masculine. But the way the sentence is structured here, it is obvious that it's masculine. So it's saying basically that it's men only that are going to be drinking there on this mountain, right? And then it goes on to say, Shutetem al ha-kodeshi, for as you have, those have been, these men have been drinking upon my holy mountain, ishatu. Now it's a gender inclusive plural that's being used right there. Kol ha-goim tamid, and all they translate that nations normally, but it's all the Gentiles will drink continually. That tells me that it's believers or churches in this case here because it's the Gentiles. And I had said this, and I sent it to Tovia Singer, because we're mutual acquaintances, and I sent it to Rabbi Winston, who used to always tell me, "What have you done, Stephen? My God, your mother would roll over in her grave." And he did a long excerpt, and I think it's in a Root Shiva, and wrote about it after I sent it to him as well. So they know, and of course, most Orthodox Jews have always believed that Rome is Esau. What you don't know, though, they consider all churches Esau. Whether you're evangelical or not, you are all Esau. And by the way, there's 3 groups that they have to kill. The Syrians or Assyrians, which includes parts of Iraq, as well as the country of Syria today. They have to kill off all the Egyptians, and they have to kill off all of Edom. That's quoted by many Orthodox rabbis. Now, don't put all Orthodox rabbis and Orthodox believers in one boat, because they're not. Not all of them would agree with that. All right? But there's the ones that are in control. Is kind of interesting. It's pretty obvious they agree in it if we look at what's going on in the world today, right? So these were things that I was seeing. Pause. Thank you, Alia. Excuse me.
Sure.
These were the type things that I was seeing, and of course it was a blessing to know all these things, but under the radar was slipping what was going on, because you have to remember the parallel is there, and the parallel will stay there. If we see Rome was in control, we see Rome, what they were doing 2,000 years ago, then must also the Sanhedrin, the high priests, the Orthodox rabbis, the Pharisees, Sadducees, etc. By the way, the Sadducees, people like Tovia Singer, he said that the Sadducees are no more. And a lot of Orthodox scholars believe the Sadducees are no more. I disagree with them. I believe they're Karaite Jews. Because Sadducees did not agree with the Talmud, they did not believe in the oral law, and they did not believe that the priest had the right to assert authority over the people. But the Pharisees did, much like the Vatican, and of course that's the difference there. So I believe Karaite Jews are very similar to what the Sadducees were. But the Pharisees we're going to get into here in just a moment. Oh, I got a clicker. So anyway, and the thing is about when we're dealing here with what's this guy's name again?
Stone.
Roger. There we go. I have nothing against the guy, but I think a lot of people are just blind. And so my hope and desire is, no matter what side they're on, whether it's Netanyahu, Pope Francis, I don't care who he is, I want their eyes to be open. Because if we don't have a heart like that for the people, then we're not on the right path. I don't want to see any of these people lost or miss the boat, as it were, to be said there. So now, I'd actually changed this title because I didn't want to shock anybody, but Yeshua called it Generation of Vipers, so we'll go ahead and keep it that way there. That was actually the title of this presentation that I'm going to get into here. I want to start with you here, and this was a passage my wife sent to me the other day, and I thought it was really appropriate. And it says here, Jeremiah chapter 11, and the Lord said unto me, a conspiracy is found among the men of Judah. This thing didn't save any of my notes. Oh well. At least it gave me the pictures here to look at. All right. So anyway, the word that they call conspiracy there is the word kasher, or kashar is the word there. That's really, to me, a conspiracy. Yeah, you could use it, but it's a link, it's a connection. All right, that's what it is. Conspiracy would be what it probably really is going to be, but it's actually a connection. There's something connecting them. All right, so it says, and Yah said unto me, a conspiracy is found among the men of Judah and among the inhabitants of Jerusalem. They are turned back to the iniquities of their fathers. That's the connection. Okay? The connection is the iniquity of their fathers. And this is being prophesied, in my opinion, of a future event. And it could, and of course Jeremiah goes into the 70 years of the Babylonian times, and it could have also have applied when Yeshua comes, but I think because Yeshua's coming to this earth as the Mashiach has a split and then picks up again, so therefore it must have a split as well. Everything that happened then has got to restart over all over again and pick up where it got left off at. So in this case here, if Jeremiah is prophesying of the time of Yeshua what would happen, it would also apply to today. I sound like a New Yorker. Well, I don't sound like one, but talk fast like one. Okay. So they're turned back, who refuse to hear my words, and they are gone after other gods to serve them. That's important. They've gone after other gods to serve them. The house of Israel and the house of Judah have broken my covenant which I made with their fathers. Now that's important, because that right there shows you in the latter part of that verse there that the breaking of the covenant includes the house of Israel, which was not there 2,000 years ago. You remember the scripture, and I didn't think to put this in there, but you remember the scripture where it talks about Ephraim, and I've quoted this before to people. Basically, he was supposed to help Judah to have his eyes opened, but he was found with his idols, and Yah said, let him alone. So, because why? The house of Israel were some of the very first ones, along with the house of Judah, because Yeshua sent the 70 out only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So they were the ones that were beginning this first part of, as we'd say today, Christianity, for lack of better words right now. But by the time Icea Rome gets here, they turned it into a mess and went right back into the same thing, the Pharisaic type of rulership as it was 325 years before that time. And then from that point, only fell down. And that's why I believe that we see the house of Israel is also included in that covenant. Now, Daniel 11, you guys have heard me quote this many, many, many times. And I am so happy the Icea Publishing Group is also putting this in I think it's the next edition if I'm not mistaken there. Daniel 11, the important part here is the part in yellow here. The children of the violent among thy people shall lift themselves up to establish the vision, but they shall stumble. You have to remember, Daniel is the one writing this. The angel is speaking to Daniel, and he said, and that's actually children is not the right way. It would be uvane paratzi amcha, which is, and the sons of the violent of your people. In other words, Daniel, your people, and Daniel was a Jew. You could say he's a Jew instead of an Israelite. So there is going to be Jews that are going to be violent. And then he says, inasu lahamid chazon. All right, they're going to try to lift up or marry the vision. In other words, they're going to try to manufacture it. Now, interestingly enough, the Talmud actually believes, I can't see that. Y'all probably can't even see that, can you? Oh, a little different that way. All right, Rambam. Now, Rambam was not around during the time of the actual first writing of the Talmud, when it was 200 years in the Common Era. But he's like in the mid part of the last 2,000 years, him and Rashi, but they're still considered some of the most renowned Torah commentators, and their work is part of the Talmud of today. It's only been included. And I have sourced Rashi, Rambam, and when I find something good that they've said, but I do not endorse Talmud whatsoever. But I'm just making that point there. But let me show you what they say here. All right, now Rambam, and I can basically tell you in a nutshell what he's going to say here, but I'm going to read a little bit of that, not too much of it, but a little bit. But Rambam, his argument was that Yeshua and his apostles, they were the ones that fulfilled Daniel 11, verse 14, I believe it was. That they were the violent ones among them that tried to establish the vision, and they stumbled, because the next words in Hebrew is, and they shall stumble. Does anybody know anything violent about Yeshua? The only one that had the temper among all of his apostles was Peter. And he did what any of us that would have had the courage to do it at that time would have done when they come to take Yeshua away. He pulled out his sword and cut the high priest's ear off. Now, he wasn't just shooting for the ear, I'm sure. I'm sure he was going for the throat, but he just missed. But instead, Yeshua tells him, put away your sword. Could I not, at this very moment, if I needed, I'd call 10 legions of angels and my Father would give it to me immediately? And he even said to him, you don't know what spirit you're of. That spirit did not belong to the apostles. Judgment comes for the latter half of his ministry because he's long-suffering, not willing that any should perish, but all might come to repentance. All right, so there's no way, but they blame it on them. Ramban blames it on Yeshua and his followers and calls them a bunch of zealots. And in fact, they have apologists that are trying to say that Qumran was not the Essenes, but they were a bunch of zealots, and they believe it was Yeshua's followers. They agree with that because they're starting to see it's kind of hard to hide it now, even though the Vatican kept all of those writings hidden from anyone's view for 50 years. And some of those books disappeared. Like, we have fragments, for example, of what's that book nobody likes? No, I'll get to it. It'll come to me in a second. Too much in my head at one time. I'm going forward and backward in my head at the same time. That's the bad thing about English and Hebrew, forwards and backwards. So I'll read a little bit here. It says, even Yeshua, well, he doesn't call him Yeshua. It says, even Jesus, the Christian, who thought he was the Messiah, was the subject of a prophecy in the book of Daniel 11:14. Also the renegades of your people will exalt themselves to fulfill the vision, but they will stumble. Could there be a greater stumbling block than this Jesus? Now that's the nicest thing I heard him say when he said that. Yeah. He had no idea what he was saying, you know, because that's right. He was that cornerstone, and it was a stumbling block for them. So, for all the prophets spoke of the Messiah who will redeem and save Israel, who will gather all the exiles, and who will strengthen them in the fulfillment of the Torah's commandments. With he, Yeshua, or Jesus, caused Israel to be killed by the sword, and their remnants be dispersed and humiliated, the Torah to be switched for something else, and the most of the world to worship a God other than the God of Israel. Okay, now I'll just stop there. What's interesting about what he says here, though, he puts all the blame on Yeshua, and he's you know, I sit there and I think to myself, another blank out there for a second. Okay, yes. So he puts the blame completely on Yeshua, that is the cause of the demise of Israel. Now the thing is that we have to understand, and this is what's really critical. 2,000 years ago, the nation of Israel, or the nation of the house of Judah, because the house of Israel had already gone into exile 780 years before that time. 2,000 years ago, what we had there, besides the fact that Yeshua came, Israel went into exile. We have never gone into exile as a people other than our own sins. So to try to pass the buck and blame it on Yeshua and his apostles and saying they were a bunch of zealots, which there is no evidence whatsoever, is totally misleading. Now, as we go into this, we're going to get into the part about the Pharisees, because there are leading rabbis, scholars, etc. In fact, Tovia Singer, in one of his debates, makes the comment, he said that the Pharisees of 2,000 years ago is the Orthodox community of today. He's the one that actually made the claim that the Sadducees are no more. And he says there is a reason why we as the Pharisees have survived down through the last 2,000 years. And I agree with him on that, but not on his reasoning why they've survived. Zechariah's got to be fulfilled. Now, John actually applies Zechariah being fulfilled at the time of Yeshua's crucifixion, when they all were weeping over him, but I believe it is a compound fulfillment because they didn't know their tribal order. Whereas 2,000 years ago, the Jews knew what tribe they belonged in. They knew they were from one of the three. They were either from Judah, they were part of the Levites, or they were Benjamites, or they were the Samaritans. Have Jew, have Gentile. Everybody knew then what tribe you belonged to if you lived in the state of Israel, because they had all the records. All right? But when Zechariah writes about the redemption there, when he talks about how that they will look upon on me whom they have thrust through, and I know they say pierced, but it is word is thrust through, because I don't believe that it is talking about his hands. I believe it's talking about where the spear, the Roman soldier, pierced his side. Now, the Jews today would say to you, we didn't do it, the Romans did. But, as Dr. Pigeon would tell you, by the court of law and everything, there is a, what do you call that thing, where you're guilty by association, but you got another word for it.
Vicarious liability.
Yes, so, you know, the thing is they handed him over and said to crucify him. So they are an accomplice to what happened to him and everything that happened. So it's not only them, but also Rome as well bears that responsibility. But he was thrust through. But what happens is, it says when they looked upon him, it was like a family lost their only son. And they said they will weep and mourn over him for days as a family lost their only son. Yes, that happened 2,000 years ago. But this next part did not happen 2,000 years ago. The house of David and the house of Nathan and their wives apart with their families. The house of Benjamin and their wives apart with their, Shimei. The house of Shimei and their wives apart and their families. And then, of course, it does name the word Levi for the rest of them there. Why is it family names? Because they don't know what tribe they're in today for sure. Even though there are guys there that are claiming to be Levites, and I don't doubt that maybe some of them probably are descendant of Aaron's. But a lot of them are not descendant of Aaron's either. A lot of them are, as Moses called them, a slave class. And I'll get into that in a moment. All right? So the thing is, though, that scripture still got to be fulfilled, because it has to be a time where they don't know what tribe they belong to. And it does show, too, that there's going to be a remnant that will believe. As Paul said in Romans 11, when he talks about all Israel shall be saved, if you ever pay attention to what Paul's saying in there, Paul is talking about there was a remnant during the time of Elijah, when Elijah said, I'm the only one left. And then Yah says to him, no, I've reserved 10,000 have not bowed the knee to Baal. That was a remnant. And then he brings it up to his own day. He said, and there is a remnant even unto this day. And then he talks about how that the natural branches will be regrafted in after he's finished with the Gentiles, the Gleam. They will be regrafted in again. And then he says, thus will fulfill the scripture, all Israel shall be saved. What's all Israel? The remnant from every age put together is all Israel. Not every person living in the state of Israel that calls themselves a Jew. All right? So let's just hold that one there. Let's see, next one here. So anyway, we talk about this violent among us. That's what the angel says to Daniel, the violent among your people, they will be the ones that will try to establish the vision, but they're going to stumble. So who are the violent among, if it wasn't fulfilled with Yeshua, and it's a prophecy for the future, as I believe it was, who would they be? Well, this article in the New York Times, Kerry reminds Congress, Netanyahu advised the U.S. to invade Iraq. Why Iraq? Remember, I said there were three peoples they want to destroy. The Assyrians, Edomites, and Egyptians. And of course, as we already know, and there's a lot of prophecies too that fulfilled over in the part there of northwestern Iraq that comes from the book of Habakkuk and places like that. But then we also have too, Shimon Peres was no peacemaker. The author here of this article says here, Robert Fisk, he says, I'll never forget the sight of pouring blood and burning bodies in Canaan. Perez said the massacre came as a bitter surprise. It was a lie. The UN had repeatedly told Israel the camp was packed with refugees. All right, now this guy was actually there. The guy, you can see a little picture up there. He was there, and he talks about what he saw there. It says here, I saw the results, babies torn apart, shrieking refugees, smoldering bodies. It was a place called Canaan, and most of the 106 bodies, half of them children, now lie beneath the UN camp where they were torn to pieces by Israeli shells in 1996. I had been on a UN aid convoy just outside the South Lebanese village. Those shells swished right over our heads into the refugee packs below us. It lasted for 17 minutes. If you've ever seen anything what it looks like somebody be ripped apart by bombs, it is not a pretty sight. I've seen them ripped apart by bombs, bullets, everything else, heads decapitated, you name it. I've already seen it. And it's not a pretty sight. And to see children, that's the hardest thing you ever deal with. It's very difficult. And the thing is not only with Shimon Peres do we have something like this here, but at the late Barry Chamish, who was a good personal friend of ours, also said to us that when it come to the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, the fatal shot was not the so-called lone assassin, but when he got into the car and was on his way to the hospital, how he ended up with that other bullet wound in his body. And I asked Barry one day, I said, Barry, I said, how did you, because I mean, and I'm sure he wrote about it in his book, who killed Yitzhak Rabin, or who murdered Yitzhak Rabin, I think is the title of it. But I asked him one day, I said, Barry, I said, how did you find out all this stuff? And he told me, he said, Steve, he said, after the trial, he said, I won't name who it was, but a friend came by and brought all the transcripts from the court itself and laid them in my lap. He said, anyone that would have reviewed this, or if there had been a jury trial there, this man would have been guilty of murder. He said, it's laying right there in plain sight, but they didn't want nobody to know anything about it. Then he also told me as well, he said, Ariel Sharon, he said, isn't it interesting that he slumps over, has the stroke right after Shimon Peres left that day? They had just had tea together, and within like 30 minutes after he leaves, he flops over with a stroke. And that's not to mention when we first began to realize that things were going on, because, you know, we would hear about different Israelis that would speak out against the things that are going on in Israel, you know, but you have to remember, I was a pro-Zionist myself at one time. You know, not to the extent of what we see in the elite circles, but I supported the nation of Israel. I believed, and I still believe, that it is prophecy that our people would return to the homeland, that Judah would return first, and then the house of Israel. But the true promised land, though, is Yeshua. That's the true promised land. And that the heel of the house of Israel is not lifted up against Judah. Why? Because most of the house of Israel are believers in Yeshua. They're not holding Judaism. They already are believers. But he's got to deal with them. Why? Because of what their forefathers did 2,000 years ago. He's got to fix that problem. They've got to make amends for what happened with their fathers. Because it's a curse. It's a generational curse. And their eyes have got to come open. All right? So we too were very much like that. And I mean, at one time, I have to be honest with you, I couldn't stand a Palestinian. I had no idea that 50% of the Palestinians' DNA is the same as the Sephardic Jews. And it actually goes back 2,500 years, which would have put them 300 years after they're already in the homeland there, that they shared the same DNA with the Sephardic community. But what can we expect? As Barry Chamish writes about the Sephardic community, he writes about different things, the ringworm children, and how the government, Shimon Peres, again, the violent among our people, were sending Sephardic children to have the doses of radiation 200 times the normal limit to these kids, that ended up being so messed up. Some of them died from the experiments, but all this so that we could have a nuclear bomb in the Middle East. And then what about the Yemenite children? Sephardic Jews that came back, they wanted to come home to the homeland to be a part of the rebuilding of the nation of Israel. What happened to the 2,000 children that went missing? That parents were just told, oh, they died. No body to be buried. If my child passed away, I'd want to bury my child. I don't want somebody else doing it. But there's a lot of things. There's a lot of discrimination. There's discrimination against the black community that are Jews in Israel as well. Because there's this movement of the Ashkenazis. And then as we begin to look into this, and I begin to read some of the books that And I don't like to read very well myself, unless it's the Tanakh or the Brit Chadashah, the New Testament. But I really had to start reading some of these things. My wife would tell me, you really should read this book here, written by Jews, and seeing, like in the case of the Holocaust, like Yana was playing this one video here, and the Orthodox guy was saying in the video, a Jew will not kill a Jew. But yet we allow 800,000 Hungarian Jews go to Auschwitz. Who did that? The Zionists and the leaders that were in, what's that little nation there in Europe? I always forget the name of that. Switzerland, thank you. Switzerland. They were getting the letters. They had worked out a deal with Eichmann, and this was Rabbi Dov Weismandel had worked out a deal with Eichmann, $3 a Jew, and he would give them all the Hungarians. At that time there was 1 million, estimated, going to Auschwitz. To show his good faith, Eichmann made up a bogus saying that they had to check the cars, stop the train cars going. He said, I'll give you 2 weeks to come up with a deposit of $500 for these Jews, and you can have them. As Netanyahu quoted himself, but they removed the video, you can still see it, there are people who still have it. He said Hitler didn't want to kill the Jews in the beginning, he just wanted them out of his country. That was true. Why didn't they leave? Because the Zionists, the elite Zionists, and those that were in Switzerland and the Jewish Congress in America didn't want, except the young, the ones that were really intelligent, only the best of the crop to come to Israel to create the nation state of Israel. Instead, tens of thousands of our people went to their deaths. And we have rabbi after rabbi after rabbi that have written about it, attested to it, and people that are secular Jews that have written about it and spoke about what happened. The Transfer Agreement, it's a very good book. It's written by a Jewish journalist, his mother and father, both survivors of the Holocaust concentration camps. It's called the Transfer Agreement because Hitler agreed to give them all their money if they'll just leave. And the elite were willing to do it, and they did it in exchange for goods. So when most Jews that had survived the Holocaust were going to Israel, they couldn't understand, after the Germans had done so much death and murder to our people, why are we sitting here with German cars, German bank, German this, German that, German buses? Everything was made from Germany. That's why Hitler promised to send the wealth, German automobiles. And today it's still the same way in Israel. Now, it's not to say that German people are bad people. How many German Christians risk their lives, including Catholics as well, that risk their lives to save Jewish people? I can't say so much for the Jewish Congress nor the Zionists, because they weren't. In fact, in the Kastner trial, one question was asked of the, and I forget which one it was that was being asked at the trial there, did you not get these letters from Dov Weismandel, where he had pled with you and said, for $3 a Jew, we will hand them over? He said, yes, we get these letters all the time. But then he asked him, he says, but why didn't you do something about it? Because they saw that the Zionists there in Switzerland, out of the Jews that were coming from Hungary, they paid $1,700 a head to get the elite that they wanted to go to Israel out of that group. And they paid, there was, I forget the number that they actually rescued, but the amount that they paid would have just about, for $3 a head, with I think $1 million more, would have got the rest of the Jews as well. But they were willing to pay $1,700 a head for only the elite. And then when he was cornered in the trial, one of his excuses was, when the war is over, the nations that will sit down for the repartitioning of the land will sit around a table to discuss what is being repartitioned. And they have sacrificed their blood in doing so, and we must also have a sacrifice of blood to have a right to sit at the table. I will say this, that's not real Jews that would ever do that. So I'll agree with that rabbi on one thing. A Jew is not going to kill his own brother. But there are some that would, and they must not really be Jews then. Or they've allowed another spirit to take control of them. All right? So we're going to move on. So we get the violent among your people. Egypt, academic. Netanyahu pushing U.S. to start a war against Iran. And listen, I'm not, the Iranian government, it's the worst probably on the planet. I get that. The women are so demoralized and abused and every other kind of thing you can think of. Of course, Netanyahu likes to point out, he says, we don't hang the gay community from the cranes. Well, they quit doing that in Iran as well, because we have believers that listen in Iran that have also sent that to us. They don't do that any longer. But then again, neither would Yeshua ever tolerate 17 years of gay parades in Jerusalem and not speak out against it. So if we're going to stand with Israel, what we need to do is we need to stand with those Jews that have come out, that are believing Yeshua to be the Messiah. Aliyah, Frank, her husband here, are examples of that. There are many Jews in Israel, and I'm not talking about the Christians there like the Catholic Church or maybe some other, like John Hagee has his ministry there. They can say things with no problem. John Hagee had to change a few things he says in order to make sure the Catholic Church was appeased, But when it comes to the believers that are there, they have to walk on eggshells. The Hyatt family, we had them on Israeli News Live, and her son, because he was winning so many, Ariel Hyatt was winning so many Jews to Yeshua, that they went after him. He was in the military. If you ever hear this young man and his testimony, you probably haven't, maybe don't know the name, and maybe that doesn't ring a bell, but he's this young, charismatic Jewish boy. He looks like maybe what King David would have looked like. Not a big guy, but just a little guy, but such a pleasant face and such a zeal for God as he witnesses to his people about Yeshua. And when they couldn't get him, they said, let's go after the mother. That's the reason he's in this country to begin with. And she also was a believer. They had converted over. They believed Yeshua to be the Messiah. And they worked diligently to try to find ways to throw them out of the country. So when we think that it's democracy, it's not a democracy in Israel. A woman, if she wants to get a divorce, she got to get a get. I just say go get it. But, But they put this one man can hold overhead. And I'm not for divorce, but the thing is, if you've got an abusive relationship and this man is very abusive to you, and then this man in Israel can take you to court, and for years you can never do anything about it. And you have to go sit in front of men only, as these rabbis tell you what you can and cannot do. I won't go into that right now. But, by the way, I did want to mention this one thing about Iran. The one thing, though, and I did this in a video not too long ago, and I'm sure you guys probably remembered if you saw it. When it comes to Iran, the thing that gets me about Iran is, even though I don't like the politics there, just like I don't like what's going on in our own country in Israel right now, there are over 1 million Christians in Iran. It is one of the fastest nations growing of a movement of believers of Yeshua. There are more than, I think, 30,000 Jews living in Iran. Now, right now, our president, along with Prime Minister Netanyahu and a whole bunch of senators and congressmen, are all ready to go blow up Iran and blow it off the face of the earth. All right? But think about this. When Abraham met Yah, Yod-He-Vav-He is who he said he spoke to, that was in a human body. So for my Jewish brothers and sisters to say that God can't be a man, tell me how he did that one. All right? But he's standing there talking to him as the other two angels are going down to Sodom and Gomorrah to bring judgment. And he starts off, and I won't go through all the numbers, but you know how it was. He's concerned. His nephew's down there. And he figures if his nephew's down there, maybe there's some more righteous believers that are there that don't worship these false gods and is not into homosexuality, which what they were very well known for. Peradventure, if there's 50, would you spare it the city for the 50? In other words, would you not blow it up for the 50? And of course, Yah says, no, I won't. I'll spare it for the 50. And he gets all the way down to 10. He said, if I can find 10 righteous, I will spare the entire city along with all the ungodliness that's going on. And I'm not against gay people either, by no means. The thing is I just think that Jerusalem is not the place for doing a gay parade. If this is supposed to be the holiest city on the planet, that's not the place. All right? And they didn't, tell you the truth too, they didn't want to. Simon Tov told us, he said it was a big to-do in Israel. He said they didn't want to go there. They wanted to stay in Tel Aviv only. He said the government came to the gay community and said, we will pay you to hold the gay rallies in Jerusalem, and we will guarantee your safety with the best security forces that you can possibly have at your disposal. Prime Minister Netanyahu did this. And I know most people were duped by the fact that he was anointed to be prime minister over Israel by Mike Evans twice. And I used to, when I first heard that testimony, I always thought, what a beautiful testimony. But you know what? You have to remember, Satan is into all these plans that they're doing. And when he took Yeshua and he showed him all the kingdoms of the earth, he said, they're mine, I'll do with them what I want. If you bow down, I'll give them to you. He said, he won't have nothing to do with that. He said, no. You worship only Yah and Him alone. Right? He wouldn't have any part of that. But it shows that all the kingdoms of the world are controlled by Satan. Right? Yeshua didn't argue the fact that he had control over them. So no wonder why a prime minister would do that. And again, I'm not against Prime Minister Netanyahu. And I'm not saying this to be politically correct either. Because if I was, I'd just tell you, I don't care about the political correctness. All right? But the thing is he did this. He went and he got them to do this. For what reason, I don't know. But also, he's also the one that passed the abortion law in Israel under his tenure to be the worst ever in the state of Israel. They can abort a baby at the 3rd trimester. For you guys out here that probably like me and didn't know, that means all the way to 9 months. The mother could be giving birth to the baby, and they could abort the child. And Netanyahu passed that law. Tell me we don't have the spirit like it was 2,000 years ago when Herod was trying to find that child and said, go kill them all. Was it 2 years old and down, I think, or 3 years old and down? I forget the number. All right? So see, this is the same situation. It's the same spirit. It's the same thing. Everything has to be the same as it was 2,000 years ago. So, but the point back with Iran, though, my point is, when I go back to the issue of Iran, if the God of heaven could come down to Abraham and say, if there's 10 righteous in that city, I'll spare it for the sake of the 10 righteous. If you're Jewish and you think all the Christians are just goyim and they're not of God to begin with, they're only animals and dogs, okay, we can leave that number out. You've got 30,000 Jews living in Iran. I would think we could probably find 10 righteous Jews living there. So what right do we have to go blow this nation up? Are we better than the Almighty that come down and said, I will spare it for the sake of 10? Or if it's the Christians or whatever, if you're Muslim and you believe that there's 10 righteous Muslims because they also are children of Abraham as well. Which quickly I'll mention this because I know this is always a debate. They come up to me and they say, Stephen, they say, you know, you're saying that Israel only had certain tribal boundaries were only like where the state of Israel is, and Syria didn't count, or the Golan was the issue, and I can only say what I see. I don't know for sure, but I just tell you what I think. They said, don't you remember that God said to Abraham, I've given to your seed from the Euphrates to the Nile River? I said, yes, I know he did. Who's the seed of Abraham? Yeshua is. Paul said, he said seed, singular, not seeds, plural. All right? If you want to take it that way. But the only reason we were the chosen people when we say the Jews, because, you know, a lot of time the evangelicals, the Zionist community, the Hebrew roots, etc., they'll say the Jews are the chosen people. And I'll never forget this, and this is before I knew what I know now. A lady comes up to me. I had an Israeli flag on my car. And I'd been living in Israel, and I'd just come back to the States. And she walks over to me and she says, "Are you Jewish?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "But I'm a believer in Yeshua." And she says, "I love you so much. You guys are the anointed. You are the chosen people of God." And I stopped her and I said, "Let me correct you on something." I said, "We were chosen for one reason.
Yeah.
That was to bring forth the Messiah. And the price we had to pay for bringing him forth. Our people had to be blinded. Our eyes had to be withholden from knowing who he was." I said, "The blessed are the Gentiles who have believed him." I said, "We turned our back on him." I said, "There was a remnant that believed. That is true." But I said, think about it like that. So, at any rate, Israel demands for a U.S. base to hitch in Trump's Syria plans, right? Now, you guys all know General Wesley Clark. Everybody knows what was revealed to this man here. Not revealed, but it was shown to him, which they later said, "Nope, we never give that to you." Just know that, right? But we were to take down, what was it, seven countries in 5 years. And as I brought out not too long ago, I believe that has everything to do with the Silk Road. And isn't it interesting that we're not, in America, we're not included in the Silk Road?
Yeah.
Because we ain't going to be here. We're going to be slave camps, is where we're going to be. But anyway, so we got kind of left out of that project there. But there again, it is the violent among your people, right? Now, it's going to get interesting, because a lot of this is things that you guys already know, but it's fixing to get interesting in what we're going to talk about here. Micah Chapter 3. "Hear this, I pray you, you heads of the house of Jacob, and rulers of the house of Israel, that abhor justice and pervert all equity, that build up Zion with blood and Jerusalem with iniquity." You can apply that 2,000 years ago, and you can apply it to today. And by the way, when I made the comment about 50% of the Palestinians have the DNA of the house of Israel, if you don't believe it, look what Ben Gurion did when they first came to the state of Israel. They knew that half of them were crypto-Jews. And he began to try to re-educate them, but he tried to educate them with the Talmud, and they wouldn't accept it. You have to remember, many of those were the farmers and stuff during the time of 70 AD, and their families never left the country, and the Romans let them stay there, and so they continued to flourish over the years. But the thing is they were forced, they actually became believers in Yeshua back then, their families did, but then when the Ottoman Empire came in, many of them became forced conversions to the Muslim faith. But Ben Gurion knew that they were crypto-Jews to begin with. They were from the house of Judah. So he was trying to win them over back into what they believed 2,000 years ago and still believing today. But anyway, so they build up Zion with blood, Jerusalem with iniquity. The heads thereof judge for reward, the priests therefore thereof teach for hire, and the prophets thereof divine for money. Yet will they lean upon the Lord and say, "Is not the Lord in the midst of us? No evil shall come upon us." And yet we forget that God is going to bring judgment on this world. Totally overlook that. Now we're going to get into something here. I need to kind of build a little platform, because as I mentioned earlier, as Rabbi Singer and you're going to see other ones here in just a moment here, had made the statement that the Pharisees of today, the Orthodox community today are the Pharisees of 2,000 years ago. But I think it's important that we understand a little about who the Pharisees were. The Pharisees were the Hasmoneans. And those of you that know the history of this, just in short, they overthrew the Zadokite priesthood. The true priesthood of Aaron was overthrown by them. Now, there are a lot of apologists that say that the Maccabees were actually Levites. And I say apologists because there is historical document that actually refutes that they were not Levites. And of course, by the time, as we can see a few things I'll just read here real quick, a series of important changes overtook the Jewish high priesthood on the early Seleucid period. Zadokites in the family line of Joshua, son of Jehozadak, had passed the office along the hereditary fashion for about 350 years before Menelas, and I may not be saying these names right, a person with different family connections. This is recorded in 2 Maccabees 3:4. Usurped the office in 172 BCE, and Menelaus' death in 162 BCE, Alchemists, whose familia connections are unknown, succeeded him by a royal appointment. After Alchemists came, we'll drop down. Then 152, Jonathan, a son, and 152, Jonathan, a son of the Matthias, became the first Hasmonean high priest. Members from his family retained the office until 37, briefly again in 35 BCE. In the scholarly literature, one often meets the claim that the Hasmoneans were not Zadokites. That is, they assumed an office not belonging to their family and thus occasioned charge against their legitimacy. All right, and that's what I say. They were not the true priest line of Aaron. And this is where the Pharisees actually come from, is from this group right here. All right, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we read here, actually not in the Dead Sea Scrolls, but this is says here, the Dead Sea Scrolls portrayal a central role for the sons of Zadok, the priest. Within the community, the teacher of righteousness, the Moreh Tzedek, named a founder, may point to a Zadokite, while the Pharisees to be as one in the following the law and sharing with wealth and reconciling based on the mouth of the sons of Zadok, and the keepers of the covenant from the community rule document suggests that the leaders of the community were sons of Zadok. And that's what a lot of scholars believe. And that's why there was such a large library there, is that when the Hasmonean dynasty overthrew the priesthood, that they fled and they went down to Qumran and established their own community there. Now apologists are trying to say it was a bunch of zealots down there, because they don't want you to believe that this Essene community may have been the true priestly lineage for the children of Israel, and that they had been overthrown. Okay? The Jewish Virtual Library of various factions that emerged under Hasmonean rule, there are particularly in interest the Pharisees, Sadducees, and the Essenes. Right? The Pharisees, notice this, the most important of the three, I disagree, were the Pharisees, because they are the spiritual fathers of modern Judaism. Then notice what connects them. Their main distinguishing characteristic was a belief in an oral law that God gave to Moses at Sinai along with the Torah. The Torah, or written law, was akin to the U.S. Constitution. Isn't that interesting about the Noahide laws? Right? In the sense that it has set down a series of laws that were open to the interpretation. The Pharisees believed that God also gave Moses the knowledge of what these laws meant and how they should be applied. The Pharisees believed that God also gave Moses the knowledge of what these laws meant. How in the world then do we have all these rabbis that can't agree with one another? Was Moses, what do they call that word when they're bipolar? No, I don't think so. The Pharisees believed that God also gave Moses the knowledge of what these laws meant, how they should be applied. This oral tradition was codified and written down roughly 3 centuries later in what is known as the Talmud. So this is what makes the Pharisees, or the Orthodox community of today, that is the Talmudist Orthodox community, liken it to the Pharisees 2,000 years ago. Now keep in mind, not all Pharisees were bad people either back then. You had Nicodemus. You had others that came out, but it was very few, and we're going to see why. Now, this here, and you can take it as a historical document. All I'll tell you is that the Assumption of Moses, which is a 5th century as far as the oldest one that we have, but is actually spoken by church fathers then as being one of the writings of Moses, but never made it into any canonical law. And I can't say yay or nay. I don't know. I've never seen any original documents on this, but I do find it interesting in what's stated here in verse 5. It says, "Wherefore it hath been said, they shall turn aside from righteousness and approach iniquity. They shall defile with pollution the house of their worship. And because they shall prostitute themselves with strange gods, for they shall not follow the truth of God, but some shall pollute the altar with the very gifts which they offer to the Lord, who are not priests, but slaves, sons of slaves. And many in those times shall have respect unto desirable persons and receive gifts. Think about what Yeshua said about the Pharisees. Does it ring a bell? And pervert judgment on receiving presents, in other words. And on this account, the colony and the borders of their habitation shall be filled with lawlessness, lawless deeds and iniquities. Those who wickedly depart from the Lord shall be judges, and they shall be ready to judge for money as each may wish. Dr. Pigeon will be telling you a little bit later about that. Seems like that there's a lot of Pharisees in the modern judicial system in the United States of America. All right, so basically Moses, though, if the document is accurate, would pretty much put the Hasmonean dynasty as a slave class. And in that case, my thought is they came out of Egypt. And the reason we're going to go into this is because of what Yeshua says about them, you generation of vipers. And again, you can apply it spiritually, physically. I don't know which way you want to look at it, but the point is we need to look seriously about this. And just quickly, the Egyptians, the serpent in Egypt, and the Bible, ever power and healing, says here the role of the serpent was prominent in Egypt culture. The serpent symbolized the beginning and the end time, symbolized fertility in ancient Egypt, as in many cultures. The Ouroboros, I don't know if I'm saying that right, Ouroboros? How you say it? Ouroboros. Thank you. The Ouroboros, a snake swallowing its tail, was a symbol of rejuvenation and eternity, an endless cycle of beginnings and endings. The serpent represented both good and bad, life, energy, resurrection. The Egyptians believed the serpent represented resurrection. Ugh. This is why we came out. Wisdom, power, cunning, death, darkness, evil, and corruption. I'm not going to read the rest of that, but I will say this here. There's even Orthodox community, they like to type that Moses' staff turned into a serpent, and they consider that the good serpent. The only reason Moses' staff turned into a serpent was, I believe that, and it's just my opinion and conjecture on this, I believe that what Yah was doing was showing to the Egyptians, I can control your God as well. And I think that's what the true meaning behind that is. Now, I want to jump though, and we're going to really get into some interesting things. Did I wrote Holy Chills on there? Oh no, that was the name of the article, sorry. Holy Chills and the Messianic Scorpion. I'm like, I hope I didn't write that kind of note. All right. Beyond the positive, this is from the Times of Israel, written by Yitzhak Ginsburg, a rabbi in Israel. Beyond the positive snake and scorpion in the soul, these creatures also herald a message of redemption for all. Kabbalah teaches that the numeric value of Nachash, snake, equals the numeric value of Mashiach, Messiah. So much of this getting into the Gematria, the Kabbalah, etc. is being used today, especially amongst believers. And I need to caution you on this. You know why the Gematria and the Kabbalah is being used? It's because they can't get divine revelation of the Word of God. It's just like when they put out about Trump that, you know, his numbers added up, and I forget what it was, but some kind of great thing for him as well.
52 like Noah.
He was, okay, like Noah?
52 like Noah. Yeah.
All right, and then I took and I said, okay, I pulled up the Gematria with just the numeric value for the words. It also says thief, murderer, or, you know, then just, I forget what it was, but things like that. Nothing, a lot of, some good, but some bad. So, okay, it's like a crapshoot. Is that what they call that, where you're throwing dice or something like that? That's what you're doing, you're just rolling dice. But the reason why rabbis got into this, and in a way I kind of feel for them because I understand. Imagine what it'd be like for 2,000 years. Your eyes are withholding because you don't recognize Yeshua. You can't get a revelation from God to know the true meaning of the Word of God.
Right.
And so therefore, it's a secondary method. They might hit it right on something, might get it right on another, might not. Okay? So anyway, what does it say here? So it says the scorpion has messianic energy as well. This is alluded in an expression of the sages that correlates the Mashiach with the scorpion, saying that both come with distraction. In addition, the numeric value of Akarav, scorpion, equals Mashiach plus David. You got to add something in there to make sure they add up just right. And also Ben Yeshai, the son of Yeshai. There it is. So. It gets worse. Yitzhak Ginsburg continues. The first stage goal is Mashiach, the son of Joseph, snake stage, while the second stage is Mashiach, the son of David, scorpion stage. First the snake, Mashiach, turns to the nation of Israel, awakens their hearts to serve God, and warns them with enthusiasm to strive for the redemptive destiny, the fulfillment of full life of Torah, war on a world evil, and building of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Later, the scorpion Mashiach turns with cool-headed equilibrium to 70 nations of the world in order to bring them close to service of God. I don't know about you, but I don't like anything that compares Yeshua to the snake, the devil. I don't care if they want to say it's the good snake or not. I don't like any of it, right? It's going to get worse. It's not going to get better. This here is on the Chabad.org website here. Jewish tradition speaks of two redeemers, each one called Mashiach. Both are involved in ushering in the Messianic era. They are Mashiach ben David and Mashiach ben Yosef. Now, I will say this. So many of the rabbis today say that Yeshua could have not been the Messiah because he didn't fulfill all the Messianic prophecies. But they know that the Messiah's got to die because the Talmud tells them so. So they had to create two Messiahs. You know, they kind of leave that part out when they're debating these ministers, and a lot of the ministers don't know these facts. They don't know they believe in two Messiahs. If I was in the debate with them, that would be the first thing I would do. What about your Ben Yosef? Don't you believe that he has to be killed? Wow. So what do you have against Yeshua? Right? So he goes on. So the Jewish, we get that one. Same on the Chabad website. The principal and final function ascribed to the Mashiach ben Yosef is of a political and military nature. He shall wage war against the forces of evil that oppress Israel. More specifically, he will do battle against Edom, the descendants of Esau. Edom is a comprehensive designation of the enemies of Israel, and it will be crushed through the progeny of Joseph. Thus it was prophesied of old. The house of Jacob will be a fire, the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau for stubble. Obadiah 1:18, the progeny of Esau shall be delivered only into the hands of the progeny of Joseph. And I don't know, I don't think I put it in there, but I have the one where they include all the Christians in there. So that means all the Christians are going to be killed. And that's what's interesting, because a friend of mine in Israel told me, he says, look, he says, watch what's going to happen. He said, Israel is going to go after Lebanon and Damascus. He said, once we take down Damascus, he said, then we're going to go after Iran. The United States is going to deal with Russia. Russia, though, is actually working with them. And he said to me, you might as well forget the United States. They're nothing but a bunch of goyim, and they don't serve Israel, and they're going to get what they deserve. This is what I'm being told. You should be, in fact, I was told by one guy with ties to the intelligence community in Israel, you should say good things about China, not bad things. Why? You know? So I said, okay, the Chinese are good people, but they're controlled by a communist dictator. That's what's going to happen to this country. By the way, he did say, he said that when this happens, and you see that we go to war with Iran, he said you better have a backpack ready and you better be prepared to live in the woods. He said because then what they're going to do is they're going to do a limited nuclear strike. Russia will do a limited nuclear strike. How do they know they're going to do a limited nuclear strike? The same man's also told me back in October that they had boots on the ground in Venezuela, and that they're going to topple the nation, and that they were going to put a de facto president in, and this was before Juan Guaido had even become a public news name. He said, but they're going to hit this country with several nukes. He said, but what happens afterwards, what's bad? They're going to genocide your nation. He said, basically, Steve, if it's not white Ashkenazi, you ain't going to be here. All I can tell you is what was said. So the principal and final function ascribed to the Mashiach ben Yosef is political and military nature. He shall wage war again. Okay, we already read that, right? Or is that another one? No, that one we already did. Okay. The immediate results of this war will be disastrous. Mashiach ben Yosef will be killed. That's why I'd like to argue with him. Okay, you believe he's going to be killed. What about 2,000 years ago? Or you just didn't anticipate a 2,000-year space and time? Nobody did. Not even the apostles did. This is described in the prophecy of Zechariah, who says of this tragedy that they shall mourn him as one mourns for an only child. Okay? His death will be followed by a period of great calamities. These new tribulations shall be the final test for Israel, and shortly thereafter Mashiach ben David shall come, avenge his death, resurrect him, and inaugurate the Messianic era of everlasting peace and bliss. Isn't that that sounds interesting too? Doesn't Yeshua come back with 10,000s of his saints? You know? But there's a group of people he comes back for, though. There's a reason. Now, by the way, Breaking Israel News says, is Netanyahu the Messiah from the house of Yosef or Joseph? They think he's the reincarnated Jonathan.
No.
Yes, they sure do. It says here, it is very clear that we see in the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, that he is fulfilling his destiny as Moshiach. By the way, that's his brother Jonathan that was killed in when they were trying to liberate hostages. But anyway, it says, destiny as Mashiach ben Yosef, that is to say, the reincarnation of Jonathan. Jonathan, just as Jonathan fought the Amalekites before David in the end of days, it will be the function of Mashiach ben Yosef, or the reincarnation of Jonathan, to battle the Amalek before Mashiach ben David. Really? So this is why we're waging the wars over there in the Middle East? Is to fulfill something that they got in their heads? So where does this all run to? This is from Matthew 23. Even so, you also outwardly appear, he's talking to the Pharisees, righteous unto men, but within you are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. Now you keep this in mind. If it was 2,000 years ago and they claim they're the same ones of today, and by the way, 2,000 years ago we went into exile, not as they say because Yeshua and his followers were a bunch of zealots that caused the Romans to kill us all off, but rather we went into exile because of our own sins. God has always said the reason we go into exile is because of our own sins. There's not one shred of evidence because the zealots caused it. Nowhere did the prophets ever say that. And in fact, if you want to talk about anti-Semitism, Yeshua was the biggest anti-Semite of his day. If you believe the way they teach today. If we were going out saying that the Pharisees or the Orthodox community are a bunch of snakes and vipers and generation, we'd be dubbed as anti-Semite. Right? But now they're trying to bring Yeshua back into the fold. They want to retry him. In fact, that guy believes in a snake Messiah also. All right, I'm going to play that for you in a little bit here. Well, okay, so one to you scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets, garnish the sepulchres of the righteous, and say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. Wherefore you be witnesses unto yourselves that you are the children of them which killed the prophets. Fill you up then the measure of your fathers, you serpents, you generation of vipers. How can you escape the damnation of hell? And if you look at the Hebrew Matthew, which Nehemi Gordon actually says, if you look at the idioms in the Hebrew language and you look at the Hebrew Matthew, they work out normal. Unlike that of the Greek Matthew. Not to say the Greek Matthew is bad, but you can find out some clear pictures that you don't get in the Greek Matthew. So I'll quote this one here from Matthew chapter 12, verse 34. This is the KJV. O generation of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh. Generation of vipers. If you look at the Greek word, it's a family of vipers. By the way, there's a difference between a viper and a serpent. Well, a serpent encompasses all the snake class. But a viper and an asp are the two snakes that birth children and don't lay eggs. Interesting how he said it too, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm just saying, conjecture. In the Hebrew Matthew it says here, make the tree good according to the good fruit, or the tree bad according to the bad fruit. Because the truth is, from the fruit the tree will be known. Family of vipers, how can you speak good things when you are evil? Surely the mouth awakens and the heart speaks. A good man from the treasure of good, a good heart brings forth good. And an evil man from the treasure of an evil heart brings forth evil. It's going to get worse. In Matthew 12, if you go to starting verse 26, if Satan cast out another Satan, remember the one, if Satan cast out Satan, his kingdom is divided and it wouldn't be able to stand? Yeshua says it here in the Hebrew Matthew. And some of this I don't bother to put any translation notes because it's pretty accurate the way they're doing it. If Satan cast out another Satan, there will be division among them. How will his kingdom stand? Now I just read this one, not the frame before, but the frame before that. Same one, right? If I cast out demons by Beelzebub, why do your sons not cast them out? Therefore, they will be your judges. He just told you if Satan can cast out Satan, his kingdom is divided, and it wouldn't stand. That's why they couldn't cast out devils, because their own kingdom of the Hasmonean dynasty would fall. That's why he says right there, and that's what it says in Hebrew too as well, why do your sons not cast them out? Therefore, they will be your judges. The fact that they don't cast out the demons, because they are filled with demons themselves. If they did, they would destroy the dynasty that they had begun. All right? Gets worse. Matthew 23. Now think about this. This is what's interesting. He's saying this about the Pharisees 2,000 years ago, and the Pharisees 2,000 years later, where we are today, they are upholding the Holy Serpent, as they call it, and worshiping the Holy Serpent. In one place, they even go so far as to say, and I don't know if I have it in my notes or not, but I'll just mention it in case I don't, that the serpent in the Garden of Eden did good for us. Jeez. You say if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have permitted them to put the prophets to death. In this you bear witness against yourselves, that you are the sons of those who killed the prophets. That really makes you wonder. And that makes me wonder about what Jude said. They were foreordained to this condemnation. In this you bear witness against yourselves that you are the sons of those who killed the prophets. You behave according to the deeds of your fathers, serpents, seed of vipers. He didn't say family of vipers, and he didn't say generation of vipers. In the KJV, it's generation of vipers this time. He said seed of vipers. And in the Hebrew, it says right there, zah. Okay? You go to Jude 1, as I mentioned, verse 4. For there are certain men crept in unawares, who were before of old ordained to this condemnation. Now, I will say this, because I've been asked this before. If the Pharisees are a reptilian race, and again, it's not all of them, there's a mixing in of the bloodlines. You remember what Rebekah didn't want to happen with Jacob? Esau went and married in amongst the nations that were there, but she said, go to Syria, go to Aram, and marry in amongst our people, our kindred. They knew that there had been an inbreeding in with the Nephilim. And I hope because I saw some of my slides are not in here like it should be, and I'm afraid that those may be missing that I had in here. But I'll make sure I say it regardless. So, Nephilim. There's some people that say there were no Nephilim after the book of Enoch. After Enoch did the book of Enoch, all the Nephilim were killed, and they were no more, and now we only had giants in this day. Okay, Moses did not know what he was talking about in the book of Numbers when he said about Enoch, A-N-A-K, not E-N-O-C-H, Enoch, that his sons were of, in Hebrew, the Nephilim. Spelled with a yod in there, which just goes to show that the rabbis, when they added their Talmudic dots, dashes, and stuff like that in there, I say Talmudic because they say it's Talmudic. They say that if you are going by the Tanakh today and you are reading the vowels that have been added in there, that you are actually following Talmud because they were the ones that put it in. And in a way that's kind of true. Because when Enoch, we find out that he was the son of the Nephilim. They didn't put the vowels right, but they didn't include the yod, which shows you that his children are Nephilim, like the fallen angels produced the Nephilim in their day. And I think his father was called Arad, which would have meant that Arad was one of the fallen angels, and they had brought that idolatry back into Israel again. The Nephilim. And this happened in the days when Joshua was coming in to take the land, and we were told not to do like they did. And which I'm hoping I have that slide in there. If not, I got it on another one. But anyway, so what do we have here? So the question is this reptilian line similar to that of the Nephilim? I don't know the answer for sure on that. But there is certainly there's a connection, because to me it's all related back to the fallen angels. I believe the fallen angels caused all of this to happen. All right, but he goes on to say, certain men crept in unawares, who were before of old ordained to this condemnation. That lets me know the Nephilim were in their day as well during the days of Yeshua. And we know this because Yeshua in Matthew 24 says, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. And then he says what? They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying and giving in marriage. And we think, oh, well, you know, the Baptist preacher comes in the church and everything and says, yes, they were marrying and giving in marriage and everything. All this marriage and divorce we got today is terrible. Just terrible. And they were eating and drinking. They were a bunch of gluttons. Enoch said they were eating each other. And they were drinking blood. Human blood. Because the children of Seth could not produce enough food for them, so they turned. And not only did they eat the animals, but they ate the humans. And no, I'm not here saying you can't have a steak. That's not the point. God put a permissive law in. It wasn't in the Garden of Eden, but he did allow that to come in. But the point is here is that in the days of Enoch, they were eating. If Yeshua says it's going to be the same way, then let's go see the historical document. The Ethiopic Gospel has the book of Enoch. It was actually found in complete tack in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then they ushered it off to Kuwait by a rich, wealthy buyer that bought it there. But one of the scholars went there, he photographed it, he compared it, he said the Ethiopic Gospel was part of the canonical library in Qumran, and it very similar to the book of, or the one that is found in the Ethiopic Gospel. And so I go there and I find out the historical document is that they were eating each other, eating the children of God, right? And we got some cannibalism going on today, don't we? They'll put babies in your Pepsi. At least I'm told. I mean, not to mention there's some tribes that'll just eat you, period. All right, so he goes on. He says, I will therefore put you in remembrance, though you once knew this, how that the Lord, having saved the people out of the land of Egypt, afterward destroyed them that believed not. There was a mixed multitude that went out. Didn't Yeshua say, all that the Father has given me, he wouldn't lose any of them? And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting change under the darkness unto judgment of that great day. So in the days of Yeshua, they had figured out how to bring these Nephilim in and conceal it, not being giants anymore like what Joshua was dealing with, right? Now this one here, I'm going to kind of make it short. I don't know how long I've been going here. Oh, that hand needs to rest. Whoa, I thought, oh gosh, I'm not long-winded, am I? Okay. Joel David Bask, The Meaning of Life, the Perspective of Kabbalah. He is a rabbinic teacher that teaches on Kabbalah. And of course, he goes into, says here, a millennial old school tradition, Jewish Kabbalah is predicated precisely upon this model that God, human, and creation and everything in between has an underlying interdimensional mathematical-like shape. Okay, and he brings it out to be the Torah. Is that right? Taurus. Sorry, the Taurus. All right, now he goes into this and he likens this, as you get into this, and to the Kabbalahs of the Ouroboros, the two-tailed serpent, which they believe, as he writes in here, like the yin and the yang, the good and the bad. Or they believe that it is a feminine and masculine serpent. Right? And let me just see real quick. In the middle there, this two-tailed Ouroboros is also the secret of what is known in ancient biblical text and traditional Judaism as Leviathan. Leviathan, ostensibly some kind of giant aquatic beast that is as big as the entirety of creation, is, however, more than a legend. Along with numerous levels of meaning, Leviathan is an esoteric concept alluding to a higher dimensional shape of reality and consciousness itself. Moreover, traditionally there is not just one Leviathan, but are Leviathans, one male, one female, one yin-like, one yang-like. Leviathan is also the code name for the two-tailed sacred serpent, a polarized singularity, a two that is one and one that is two. In red, he says here, the Torah's two-tailed Ouroboros, the Torah's two-tailed Ouroboros, is a model of a living, universal, cosmic torus. The spiral relationships in the direction of flow of this structure is one of the most, if not the most critical models and maps accessibly now in our generation to begin to describe the relationship between creator and creation, divinity and humanity, soul and body, between the higher and the lower dimensionality, and even between the past and the future. The two-tailed sacred serpent Taurus is the root formulation which iterates, replicates itself throughout all existence above and below. Yeah, when I switched this over, by the way, it took out a lot of the things I was going to mention to you guys here, which kind of is not, I don't like to see that. But you have to wonder, and a lot of you guys probably already know this anyway, how did they get the Nephilim in our day? And I'm assuming the same way the reptilian line is here as well. It's because we find out that when the children of Israel, when Joshua was going in and they saw the giants in the land, they were really troubled by these giants. And as I said, Moses in the book of Numbers said that they were Nephilim, and their father Enoch, A-N-A-K, was of the Nephilim. So he was literally birthed by one of those angels there. We know, according to the book of Enoch, that they're imprisoned. They're actually imprisoned in a place that, if the way I look at it, when I actually begin to examine the earth and everything, I believe that they may be imprisoned in Antarctica. But there is this veil of fire that comes down where they're imprisoned at. But Enoch says that they would be involved in the affairs of man until what? The consummation. How are they still involved in the affairs of man? But they are. That's according to the book of Enoch. Now, if you move on, though, what do we find out, though? In Leviticus chapter 18, when Moses is dealing with the sins of sexual immorality, he is dealing with, okay, you can't sleep with your neighbor's wife. You're not to be, he goes into the homosexuality, he goes into all these sexual immoralities that are happening. And then right in the middle, as he's telling about the different sexual sins that Israel was not to be a part of, he slips in one. And he says in there, can I borrow can you grab it to Leviticus 18 for me real quick?
Leviticus?
Yes, please.
Oh wow, it opened right to it.
Yeah.
Kidding. I literally.
That's amazing.
That's crazy.
Wow. Right?
Actually 18, not 8, but it's what was in your mind.
Yeah, it's right there. Oh no. Open.
I will tell you one that happened though. Well, I'm looking for this. Back, I don't know, close to 30 years ago, I was walking back. I was going to go back and read again in the scriptures, and as I was going back, I was trying to remember where did I leave off at, and I thought, oh yeah, that's right. It was Jeremiah 14. I still remember this like it was yesterday. And as I'm walking along, the Holy Spirit spoke to me audibly. I say Holy Spirit, I don't know if it was the Holy Spirit, it was an angel of God, who, I don't have no idea, but I know it wasn't coming from me. And said, read Isaiah 61 instead. He never told me why. I prayed about it for years, but I will tell you one thing. For a year straight, every time I opened the Bible, it would open to Isaiah 61. Wow. For a year straight. And I would take it. Friends would come open. I said, watch this. I'll just pick it up and drop it on the table. Isaiah 61.
Wow.
Okay. So as we're getting in here, let's see. Let's just start with verse 11. The nakedness of your father's wife, daughter, born to your father, she is your sister. You shall not uncover her nakedness. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's sister. She is your father's blood relative. You shall not uncover the nakedness of your mother's sister, for she is your mother's blood relative. Right? It keeps going down like that, right? And then we get down here. Let's see. I got to find the right one. We'll go to verse 18. You shall not marry a woman in addition to her sister as a rival while she is alive to uncover her nakedness. Well, they learned something about Leah and Rachel, didn't they? Or Rachel, sorry. Also, you shall not approach a woman to uncover her nakedness during her menstrual impurity. And by the way, you know how they say that, they try to say that she's impure because of the blood? You remember when Yeshua made the one comment, he said to the priest, he said, if you, as a priest, and you're dealing with the sacrifices, and you touch the blood, will you not be considered unclean? They said, yes, we're unclean. You know why? There was only one blood that was going to save the human race. And that applied to both woman and the sacrificial thing and the touching of blood. That's what that was. All right. So we go on down. Let's see. And you shall not approach a woman to uncover. Okay. I got to find it. Where's it at? Okay, here it is. All right. Everything, all the way down, the whole chapter and the whole chapter afterwards is going to deal with all these things you're not supposed to do in a sexual manner and having any kind of promiscuity, right? Then he says here in verse 21, you shall not give any of your offspring to... Let me just quickly say it though, and then that way you can look it up for yourself as well. If you go to Leviticus chapter 18, because offer them to Molech, nor shall you profane the name of your God, I am Yah. You're not to give your seed to Molech. What's that got to do with sexual sins? And yet the word aver in Hebrew, which is used in a different, I forget exactly where it's at, when it's spoken about again by the prophet, he says, do not pass your children through the fire to Molech. Be'esh to Molech. To me it's a veil. Whether it has anything to do with Antarctica or not, that doesn't really matter. All right? But it's a veil. And they're passing through one dimension and into another, and they're able to bring back children. And he tells you not to do it. Now he also says in another part, Moses is dealing with this, and he says when you go into the land, don't do like the other nations have done. They pass their what? Their seed through the fire to what? To Molech. How did the giants get here? Not on the ark. They learned to pass the seed through the fire. Now you're not going to believe this, but in Orthodox Judaism, there are some that speak about, and it's not easy to find, but when they believe that when they're in prayer and they're doing this like this right here, they get so caught up that they can leave the body and go to another dimension and actually, I guess they consider it in a spiritual sense, but with Binah. Okay, like the spirit, one of the spirits of God. If they get talking about doing that now, what do you think they were doing then? So they had figured it out, and we were commanded not to do like them. And of course, we know the case of Jacob. Jacob knew not to do like that. His mother said, you are going to go to my people, and you're going to marry one of my people, because she knew that their bloodline was not corrupted. Esau, he did wrong. He allowed the bloodline to be corrupted. All right? Now, but then again, we can get into the issue about Syria. As they come back and everything, they make the pile of stones. You don't cross over this line to do me harm, and I won't cross over that line to do you harm. And I'll tell you something. I used to think this had a lot to do with Rome, and I do believe it's a compound fulfillment. But if you remember, what did Laban say to Jacob? He said, though we be apart, and there is no man between us. He knew the time would come where they would die. He said, if you take any other daughters to be your wives, other than my daughters, God be a judge between you and me. I never caught this until last night. That's what was going on originally. When Moses commanded them, when you come into the land, don't do after the nations. Don't pass your seed through the fire. Don't take another wife. Don't bring back this abomination that allows these giants, these Nephilim or reptilians or whatever they may be, to get into this side of the earth. Why? Because it comes back to haunt us. And that's exactly what happened during the time of Yeshua. By then, the Hasmoneans, who were a slave class that came out of Egypt, that were also practicing these type of sorceries, they had brought it all the way up. And then we were dealing with this. I want you to listen here. This is Ariel Alora. And Yana was actually interviewing him. I was sitting there listening, and we didn't know what to think. We had no idea what this guy was going to talk about. We just knew that he wanted to get a retrial for Yeshua. He wants to retrial Yeshua because he felt like he was treated unfairly. You know? But this is pretty creepy when you begin to realize what's really going on. Listen to what he says.
But if you learn something.
Wait. Oh, I'm holding the cord. And I've wrapped it around.
Okay, so God expects us to grow up in a state that you can connect really the tree of knowledge, good and evil, to the tree of life. It's meant to the Kabbalah.
Oh, let me tell you real quick what he said there. You cannot connect the tree of knowledge with the tree of life as evil. Okay, that's what he said. Oh. Let me see if I can get him to finish.
Okay, so God expects us to grow up in a state that you can connect really the tree of knowledge, good and evil, to the tree of life. It's meant to the Kabbalah.
According to Kabbalah, you can't do it.
I'm afraid of it, but all the secret of the Torah is what we call the soul of the Torah, is the Kabbalah, the Hasidut. The Hasidut gives the possibility that every single person can learn Kabbalah in a way that he will not imagine all kind of false thing. Okay, so the Hasidut gives the possibility that everybody can learn Kabbalah, can learn the secret of the Torah. And then when you learn, you connect the tree of knowledge, good and evil, what is the Torah, the tree of fig, to the tree of life, then all the curse become blessing. So it's no harm, it's no problem that the snake will win. It's no problem that the snake will go to hell. It's no problem of anything. The Torah is full of curse. the book of Revelation is all a big curse. No problem.
No problem. No problem with the serpent. And this is what not just Alora says, this is stated by many rabbis, that the serpent did them a favor. I don't see the favor. You know, I mean, granted, Yeshua had to come in order to redeem back what was lost. So that was a pretty bad curse, and I don't see anything good about it. All right, let's go to the next one here.
Okay, so God expects us to grow up in a state that you can connect really the tree of knowledge, good and evil, to the tree of life.
Did I already play that?
The Kabbalah, the words that the Christians are afraid.
Oh, I must have loaded the same one. All right, there was another one where he goes into it again, and I apologize, I didn't get the right one there. But let me read this to you, and I'm gonna stop here in just a second here. All right, this here is from an article titled Shabbati Zvi, the Holy Serpent and the Passover Plate. The serpent to Eve, you shall not surely die, for God doth know that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be open, and you shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Now let's drop down to the paragraph where the blue is. Would we be better off spending our lives in paradise of infancy? Yes. It's hard to say. All we know is that we wouldn't be fully human if we did. That's okay with me. From this perspective, the serpent may not be our destroyer, but our deliverer, or possibly both. Now for the shocker. Same article. The prison house of this evil creation, the wicked creator Demiurge, the God of the Old Testament, had blinded Adam and Eve and made them his slaves. The serpent brought them the light of saving. Really. Not a surprising that some should think this way. What is a surprise is to find that these Gnostic ideas dormant for centuries popping up in Judaism in the middle of the 17th century. Hebrew writings from that period know a thing called the Holy Serpent. Hanachash HaKodesh. That doesn't go together. That's Holy Serpent name is Sabbatai Zvi. A bit of background. Hebrew letters are also numbers, each letter with a numeric value unique to it. If you add the numeric value, which are going to the same thing we talked about already, that the Nachash and Mashiach equals 358. Somebody's name may equal to 358. Which side do you want to be on? All right, I apologize. There was many pages that I didn't have in there, but as long as I done wore everybody down, 4:30 here, it's time for me to stop anyway. So let's take a break and everything, and we'll have Dr. Pigeon come back up here in just a little bit, and then maybe at the end, maybe I can talk about the CIA thing for just a little bit. So.